Hello there, Star Wars fans. It's another month, and it is time for another one of my Star Wars book reviews. And since it's February, and since Valentine's Day is coming up this Tuesday, in fact, I thought it would be appropriate to talk about something that was very romantic and love-centric and focused on relationships and all that other fun, lovey-dovey stuff that all of us love and adore so much. As far as Star Wars goes, obviously I had a few options. I could have done The Courtship of Princess Leia. I could have done, I guess, the Hand of Thrawn duology where, well, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a little thing in there that, for those of you who haven't read it, there's a little thing in there that relates to this type of stuff. I could have done the Kenobi book, which has very romantic, centered stories involved with it. But I decided to go along with these. And what I'm about to call these books, it's an unofficial fan term, and it's a term that's been given to these books because of a certain character that's involved in all three stories. What I have right here and what I'll be reviewing today is the Callista Trilogy. Like I said, it's not like an official trilogy or anything like that. It's not one continuous story through three books. But because of one character, Callista, is featured in all three stories, it's kind of lumped together by fans as its own trilogy. And who is Callista, I guess, is the immediate question that some of you might have, for those of you who haven't read these books. She is a Jedi Knight who Luke stumbles across over the course of these books and ultimately forms a romantic relationship with her. I'm going to get into the specifics of that relationship in a little bit, but what I'm going to say right off the bat is that these three books right here, starting with Children of the Jedi, Darksaber, and Planet of Twilight, which was the third book, what I'm going to say right off the bat, I do not like these books. I am not a fan of these books. I read Darksaber when I was a kid, a long time ago, like back when it first came out. And back then I was a kid. I'll read anything with Star Wars in it. I didn't really look at it with that much of a critical eye. But having read the other two books and having reread Darksaber, man, I really do not like these books. I really, really do not like them. And I guess part of that is that I'm not the most romantic guy in the world, and I don't mean to get too personal here, but romantic stories don't really interest me that much, although I'm not completely opposed to them either. Obviously, Han and Leia, they're in Empire Strikes Back, Han and Leia are my couple. I mean, that's like, as far as fiction goes, I mean, they are my power couple. I love that romance, I love that relationship. Yet in the prequels, I hated the relationship between Anakin and Padme. Why is that? What's the difference between one or the other? I think part of it has to do with the fact that in Empire Strikes Back, the romance between Han and Leia was not, like, the main focus, and I don't think the romance can ever be the main focus. Because I think once it becomes the main focus, then it just becomes this kind of cliched, insipid, I love you too, and making moon eyes at each other, like the Twilight type of shit. And I don't like that. I've never liked that. It's boring to me. It's, it's called Star Wars. Don't you have more important things to worry about than... I mean, again, going back to Attack of the Clones, Anakin and Padme are making goo-goo eyes at each other and talking about how much they hate sand and love the water and all that other bull crap, and it's like, aren't you being hunted down by an assassin? Isn't that, like... It's just weird to me that throughout the course of that entire story, like, the assassin never hunts them down or tracks them down or anything, and there's no threat looming over them the entire time. It's just them, spouting horrible dialogue at each other and sitting in really exotic locations while Natalie Portman's outfits get skimpier and skimpier. It's really quite comical the way it plays out, but... to me, romances can never be, like, the main focus of things, and when it's more of a side thing, and it allows the characters to kind of react more naturally, I guess, like, Han and Leia never felt forced. It felt like something that naturally evolved in the situation that they were in throughout the course of the story. And I don't know, maybe that, I don't know if I'm explaining that well at all, but basically my point is, when the romance is the main focus, which is why things like Twilight never interested me, or things like 50 Shades of Grey never interested me. It's like when it's just all about love and romance and sex and that crap, that to me is just boring. It's like I'm more interested in the bigger conflict, or what are the ramifications of the conflict, and how are the characters going to react to whatever the conflict is, and then everything that kind of spills out from there moving forward. So, and a romance can be part of that, but I don't like it when it's the main focus. And unfortunately, in these 3 books, it is the main focus. It is kind of like especially in books 1 and 3. And I should mention, and I guess I'll start going into the specifics right now. We've got Children of the Jedi, where we're introduced to Callista. This book was written by Barbara Hambly, and at times it really does feel like a Star Wars equivalent to a romance novel, where the story of this particular story of this novel is the story of the story. That's I'm great with words. I've got a very extensive vocabulary, but I really need a thesaurus badly. But anyway, Children of the Jedi. It's about Luke Skywalker stumbling across, well, not stumbling across, they were premonitions and other things that set it up, but he comes across an old dreadnought warship of the Emperor's called the Eye of Palpatine. Very subtle name. And he gets on board, and the ship is going to be automated and it's kind of like a haunted vessel, where it like runs on its own through some AI called the Will. And there are people and other alien races living on the ship still, and they've kind of all gone insane. And Luke and C-3PO go on board to try and get it to not attack a nearby planet that was home to several Jedi children. And it's discovered through the course of the story that the part of the ship is possessed by the spirit of an ancient Jedi, not an ancient Jedi, but an old Jedi named Callista, who exists as an AI and bonds with Luke. They fall in love because sure, why not reasons. And and that takes a very weird turn. It gets even weirder when Callista actually, to exist as a person, winds up inhabiting the dead body of one of Luke's Jedi students. And it's like, so wait, Luke, now you're like making out with one of your students? I'm like, that's a little, I don't know, it's just weird. It's just really weird. And the setup itself is not bad. I like that, like the idea of it, of Luke and 3PO getting on this kind of haunted vessel and having to figure out its secrets and being trapped on it and having to deal with all that. But unfortunately, it's like that all kind of takes the back seat to the Luke and Callista romance, which I don't really care about. Han, Leia, and R2-D2 and Chewbacca are given very, very little to do except unravel the mystery of who's ultimately behind the Eye of Palpatine and what's automating it and what's going to cause it to attack this planet or whatever. There's a really chilling scene where R2-D2 kind of goes haywire, but other than that, there's not really a whole lot for them to do, which is unfortunate. But I mean, it's just kind of, like I said, the main focus of the story is Luke and Callista's romance, and I really don't care about it all that much. And it's strange to me that some writers really got obsessed with giving Luke a romantic interest. It happened in Dark Empire in the comic, and in that case, she was so inconsequential that she just didn't matter. She was just there. It felt like she was just there to make out with Luke, and then she ultimately went away. And it's like, okay. And as most more hardcore fans know, well, I guess I'll save that for the end, where I get into who Luke ultimately ends up with. But yeah, so that's Children of the Jedi. And then there's Darksaber, which is the one that I read as a kid. This one is written by Kevin J. Anderson, who's a very prolific Star Wars writer. He wrote a lot of material for Star Wars. I believe he was involved in the Young Jedi series, which I've been unable to get good copies of. I would love to go back and reread those. He also wrote for many of the anthology books like Tales of the Bounty Hunter, which I'm currently reading, Tales of Jabba's Palace, Tales of Mos Eisley. I believe he had a hand in all three of those at least. And he also more famously wrote the Jedi Academy trilogy, which I just reread about a month ago, and I definitely plan on reviewing that at some point. And in that review, I'll talk more about Kevin J. Anderson's writing style and what I think of him as a Star Wars writer, but I'll touch up on it here in a little bit with Darksaber. I think he's got some really good ideas. It's just sometimes the story structure, he tries to do too much. And and his stories ultimately lose focus. And forgive me for my cough. I've been sick the last week, for those of you who don't know. So I might end up losing my voice by the end of this, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But anyway, in Darksaber, you've got a plot going on where Luke and Callista are continuing their relationship, but Luke, whereas the romantic element of it isn't quite as focused on here, which I like. This one's about Callista functioning as a Jedi again because she's found in this new body. She does not have Force powers anymore, and she's trying to rediscover her connection to the Force. That's fine. Makes for a fine story idea, I guess. Unfortunately, it doesn't really pay off that much. They find out that the only way she can really connect to the Force is through the dark side, which kind of freaks her out, and ultimately, by the end of the story, she leaves Luke. Oh no, the romance is on the rocks. No. And it doesn't really do anything interesting, and it doesn't really do that much to tie into the main conflict, which I think is supposed to be the Darksaber weapon, which the Darksaber weapon is being developed by Durga the Hutt and the original architect or designer of the Death Star, who is not Jyn Erso's father, for those of you who saw Rogue One. This is the expanded universe, the Legends timeline, completely different set of circumstances. Gets him together to develop yet another planet-busting super weapon, which, as I get into these reviews more and more, and the more planet-busting weapons come up, you're going to watch me get really, really irritated with all the planet-destroying weapons that show up in these stories, because it's like, goddamn, they just keep trying to recreate their own version of the Death Star. It's just, god damn it, can we stop making Death Stars? It was my biggest problem with Episode 7. It's like, no more Death Stars. Stop it! Just stop! But anyway, they designed the Darksaber, which is basically just a giant lightsaber that, and no, it's not, Darksaber is actually a term used for the Mandalorian version of the lightsaber, which you may have seen in the Clone Wars cartoon show, and more recently it just came back in Rebels. This is not that. It's basically just a giant lightsaber that's explained to be like the laser portion of the Death Star, just kind of condensed down and shaped like a giant lightsaber. But with the same basic properties of being able to destroy an entire planet. This is boring and pointless, and just, I don't care what you call it or what shape you give it, it's just the Death Star again, and it just gets boring and old and just a retread. And having reread the book after seeing Episode 7, where I just looked at Starkiller Base and said, oh, fuck you. To see it again here in print, it just made me roll my eyes so far back, I thought I was going to lose my pupils. But it's just, God, I've gotten so sick of planet-busting weapons. Couldn't we have just left it in A New Hope and just never do it again? I mean, do we really have to just keep bringing that back? I don't know. I mean, the ending to New Hope was pretty great. I never needed to see another Death Star again, though. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because the Darksaber never gets to do anything. So they set up this planet-busting weapon, but ultimately, the way the story plays out, it never ties into anything. It never gets to do anything, and it gets destroyed. So, well, what the hell is the point? Wait, what? Why'd you even go to all the trouble of developing this whole thing and writing so much of the story about it and then ultimately do nothing with it? At least Starkiller Base, at least they used it. It's like, alright, so at least they're presenting it as a threat, but here it was like, it didn't do anything. It's like, oh, okay. Pointless? Yeah, sure, okay, pointless. Honestly, the part of the story that I found the most interesting was the one that didn't involve the Darksaber and didn't involve any of the major characters. It involved a couple of Luke's Jedi students, Kip Doran, who became quite the genocidal little madman in the Jedi Academy trilogy, but I'll touch up on that when I ultimately get around to reviewing those books. And Dorsk81, who... Dorsk81, I think, is one of the most underutilized Star Wars characters, one of the most unique concepts for a character. And this kind of like, again, going back to Kevin Anderson's writing style, where he has some really great ideas. The idea for Dorsk81 is awesome, because ultimately he comes from a planet where everybody is cloned. And everybody is a genetic copy of whatever came before him. And Dorsk is the 81st copy of the Dorsk genetic stream or whatever. So he just comes from a planet of clones and a planet of ever creating replicants, basically. But he found, and Luke ultimately found, that he has a connection to the Force and is a Jedi and broke the mold of his people and his lineage. And how does the 81st clone of a genetic stream that's been exactly the same through 80 previous incarnations produce a Jedi with Force sensitivity that's different? I mean, that's a very interesting concept, and you get into some very interesting philosophies there. And because of that interesting setup, Dorsk is actually one of my favorite characters in the EU. It's just a shame that they never really get to do anything with him. In the Jedi Academy trilogy, he barely does anything. We don't even get his introduction in the Jedi Academy trilogy, which is very disappointing. And in this story, spoiler alert, he dies, so we don't get to see... the character was sorely underutilized. I think there was a lot of potential there, because I think it's a very unique concept. I think it's a very cool idea, and it's something that they could have gotten a lot more material out of. I mean, ultimately, he sacrifices himself and is the hero of the day, but... I think the idea of Dorsk81 is very interesting and very cool, and I think they could have done a lot more with it. But Darksaber is like kind of his moment to shine. So if there's one major positive of Darksaber, it's that Dorsk81 got his moment in the sun, and that's pretty cool. But the threat that he was dealing with and what Kit was dealing with was an attack by Admiral Dala, who was a character that Anderson also set up in the Jedi Academy trilogy, I believe, whether intentionally or not, to be his own version of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Unfortunately, she never reaches the level that Thrawn does. She was a student and lover, as it turns out, of Grand Moff Tarkin, and she was touted as this military genius, and he gave her authority and power when women in the Empire typically didn't rise to that level of rank. Unfortunately, we never really see that from her. We just kind of see her, she's in charge of a group of scientists and soldiers and 4-star destroyers in isolation, so isolated that she wasn't even aware that the Empire fell, and this is where she was in the Jedi Academy trilogy. And then we just see her fail and fail and fail and fail and fail. So she never reaches that Thrawn level, that genius level, where she really does feel like a threat. And again, there's potential there to make her a great character, but she doesn't really reach it, and that's unfortunate. She does have one moment in this book where she meets up with all the different Imperial leaders, the ones that are left. And a really cool scene, I think. It's kind of funny because all the different warlords have their own, like, insane, made-up, grand titles that sound ridiculous, but it sounds like a bunch of people trying to make themselves sound more important than they really are. And it's her, the serious-minded person that's trying to unite what's left of the Imperial forces, and everybody else is just out for themselves and worrying about making themselves look as good as possible. And in a very, very chilling scene, she actually kills them all and gasses them all in one fell swoop, and that was very cool. That was cold. That was awesome. I just wish we got more of that from that character, because if she had been more like that and it had been something like that on a regular basis, I would consider her on, like, Thrawn's level, but as is, it's just kind of like, alright, that's one great moment. And then she opts to lead an attack against, against the Republic and against the Jedi forces and everything, and it's up to Kip and Dorsk to stand in her way, which sets up their story. That part of the story is the most interesting part of the novel. Everything else, the Darksaber's pointless, Luke and Callista, I don't care. But that stuff, the stuff involving the EU characters that are barely known, that was the most interesting part of the novel. So, I will say Darksaber is the best of the three, the best one, but there's only like a third of the book I actually liked, so take that for what it's worth. But, in conclusion, we have Planet of Twilight, also written by Barbara Hambly, and allows her to kind of provide closure to Callista and Luke's relationship, which is not reconciled, thank God. She moves on to different things, but not before passing on some of her Jedi knowledge to Princess Leia, which, that was interesting because Leia, in a lot of the EU stories that I've read, was kind of portrayed as being not very good at picking up Force powers and Jedi abilities, which I think makes sense, because that's not, you know, to be a Jedi, you've got to be centered, you've got to be at peace, and you've got to be focused and emotionally and psychologically just kind of at peace with yourself. And you look at Leia at this point in her life, is like, look, she's trying to put a government together for crying out loud. She's got kids to raise, for crying out loud. It's like, she's got more important things to worry about than making shit float, okay? I think Leia's got way more on her plate than worrying about becoming a Jedi. It's like, Luke, you handle the Jedi crap. I need to handle all this crap. So the fact that Leia was not very good at that stuff, I thought was kind of appropriate and made a lot of sense to me, because it's like, why would she need to be good at that stuff anyway? It's like, dude, she's trying to balance 89 different things that have nothing to do with the Force or Jedi or anything. I mean, she's busy. I mean, leave her alone. She's busy. But it was interesting to see Callista in her one major contribution, in my mind, her one major contribution to the Star Wars expanded universe, where she actually did manage to pass on some of her knowledge to Princess Leia. Unfortunately, that's kind of the only good thing, one of the only good things in this book. I don't want to say it's completely bad, but again, it's kind of this, okay, let me just say this. The villain in the story is a Jedi Hutt. A Jedi Force-using, lightsaber-wielding Hutt. That is ridiculous. I'm sorry, that is so funny to me. Like, it's funny and it's bad, but in kind of a hilarious way, so I don't know if I guess I can't say I hate it, but just the idea of it just cracks me up. The idea, try to imagine Jabba the Hutt with a lightsaber. That is absolutely hilarious to me. And also contradictory, because in the EU, they do explain that, in other stories, they've explained that Hutts are Force blind, which explains why the Jedi mind trick doesn't work on Jabba in Return of the Jedi. But the idea of a Hutt being a Force user, I'm trying to picture, like, if George Lucas had done it in the prequels, like, we would have seen, like, a Hutt, like, bouncing off the walls and doing backflips and holding, like, two lightsabers and twirling them around. It would have been the fucking funniest thing in the world. But, yeah, it's really silly and kind of lame and dumb. But fortunately, by the end of it, Luke and Callista's relationship is not reconciled, and the lovey-dovey crap that we got in Children of the Jedi is not repaired here, and their relationship is pretty much put to an end, which opens up Luke to ultimately marry, again, spoiler alert, don't want to ruin it for anybody that doesn't know, but as most of you diehards already do know, Luke marries Mara Jade, who is a character introduced in the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, and I was completely okay with that. And the reason for that is because Mara Jade was brought in, and the way she was written into the Thrawn trilogy, she just fit in with the main cast like a glove. I mean, it was her personality, it was her attitude, and her background, and everything that who she was established her as a great character. So she would have been a great character whether she married Luke or not. Like, that was immaterial and just kind of a bonus, really. It's like, yeah, she's cool, Luke. Wind up with her. Also, she's not your sister, and she's not one of your Jedi students, so it's like, that's a plus too. So, as a, not creepy this time. And, yeah, and I guess that's the thing, and I guess that's also tying it back to Empire and Attack of the Clones. Han and Leia were great characters, and their relationship was just kind of two great characters finding a bond with each other. Whereas Attack of the Clones, you have a whiny little, poorly acted Anakin Skywalker and Little Miss Padme, who they tried to present as a badass, and that's no. just no. Not gonna work. But Yeah, it's for, I guess for those romances to work, another thing that you need is for the characters to actually work themselves individually, so that when they do mesh up together, it'll feel like it'll feel warranted, and it'll feel like a payoff. And actually, reading the Thrawn trilogy again, I reread it a year ago. It really does feel like it's like, yeah, this. Maybe not by the end of the Thrawn trilogy, but at some point down the road, you can see it's like, yeah, they could potentially like become a couple at some point, and I'd be okay with it as long as it doesn't. Sacrifice the good traits of the characters. Because that's the other thing. It's like, I think back to something like Arrow, where Felicity started off as a great character until she hooked up with Oliver. And then it was like, oh my god, this is terrible. Please stop. No, seriously, please stop. I can't watch this anymore. This is the worst. And it went from being two really good characters to being two attractive idiots making goo-goo eyes at each other. It's like, the show is absolutely painful to watch now, and I kind of want them both dead. I know it's called Arrow, and you can't kill the arrow, but I don't care. I want him dead. But anyway, that's just kind of my rant on the whole situation. So, is there anything else to like about these books besides the stuff I've already pointed out? Well, like I said, Dorsk 81, Darksaber kind of gave him his moment to shine, and for a character that I saw a lot of potential in, I thought was a really cool idea. It was nice that they gave him at least something, although I felt like they could have given him a lot more. Admiral Dalla finally got to do something really cool and stand as somewhat of a threat, and that was good to see. But those two were in Darksaber. The two stories that Barbara Hambly wrote, I think one thing that she did really, really well, and it's not going to sound like much of a compliment, but in my mind it is, because it actually is very hard to get these two characters down. I felt like she wrote C-3PO and R2-D2 very well. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but if you write, it's very easy to write C-3PO as a slapsticky, kind of bumbling idiot, or like overly whiny, and it's very easy to kind of not find that balance. I felt like, as far as the dialogue goes and his behavior goes, I felt like she captured C-3PO very well, especially in Children of the Jedi, where he's paired with Luke, which, by the way, I thought that was actually a very cool pairing, because normally it's Luke and R2, right? And so I thought it was nice that she decided to change that up a little bit. I thought that was kind of nice. Excuse me. And R2-D2 is very hard to get across in written text, because he's a character that communicates entirely through sound effects, and that's hard to kind of get his feisty personality across through, just written words that sound like, that are meant to represent sound, onomatopoeia or whatever. That's very, very hard to do, and I felt like she, more than most other writers, I thought she did a very good job with that. While reading her two stories, I thought, no, that's C-3PO and R2-D2, where a lot of times it's very hard to get that authenticity out of them. So I really did appreciate that. But on the whole, not a fan of these books. Not among my favorite EU stories, but like I said, I am not the most romantic guy, so, stories that center around a relationship, especially one as kind of like goofy and silly as Luke and Callista's was, is just not going to do it for me. But if you're into more romantic novel-y type of stuff, I guess Children of the Jedi would be worth checking out for you. If you like Kevin J. Anderson's writings, Darksaber would probably be fun for you to read. Planet of the Twilight, unfortunately, I think is the weakest one of the three. I don't know if I could recommend that to anybody. It's just, unless you just want to see the hilarity of Leia getting into a lightsaber fight with a hut. I mean, that's like, I mean, it's so weird. It's like, all right, go ahead, check it out. It's different. I'll give it that. It is different, but like I said, not a huge fan of these books. But next month, I plan on doing something that I did enjoy and something I do want to talk about, and a book that I will actually recommend to you guys. But we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, until then, I will see you all next month.